The Way of Will John.
What could one person do to amplify their ability to affect the world around them? Is that meditation? Is that focusing only on one thing? Is it learning how to do some sort of single pointed focused meditation? Or how would one do that? Because it would be helpful, I imagine.
Yeah, it's a confluence of several things. Let's just start with the thing that has the least power. The least power is just an intellectual wish. Oh, I wish it wouldn't rain on Saturday. All right, does very little. Okay, that's not much. You've got an intellectual thought and you put it out there, and all right, maybe it does just a little bit of something, but not much. Pretty weak player. Okay, if you can take that thought, that idea about when you don't want it to rain, let's say, or if you do want it to rain, and you can take that out of the intellect and put it into an intuitive space. Now, a lot of people think, what's that mean? How do you take a thought, and put it in an intuitive space? But you think all the time in intuitive space. That's what you're doing out on that field when you're playing soccer. You're thinking in an intuitive space, not an intellectual space. Intellect is too slow. Intellect is, if you got to think about the problem, well, the time you set up the problem to think about it, the situation's changed. You don't have time to think. The intellect doesn't play there because it's too slow. You need to be able to just do it because somehow it's the right thing to do. And somehow that there's somebody over there that's going to be just in the right spot when you kick that ball over there. And it's not because you stopped, looked around and said, oh, I see, Joe's over there running and he's going to be there in 10 seconds. I'll get the ball to him. It's not like that. You get your data out of microsecond things that you can kind of feel where people are on the field and you get a glance and that's all you need. It's all the data you need. It's just a speck out there in your peripheral vision because you've trained for that. You see? So yes, you can train yourself for this. And some people are very strong in their ability to modify future probability, and most are very weak. But anybody can learn to be strong, just like anybody can learn probably to be a good soccer player if they're not too young or not too old, and if they work hard enough at it, right? I mean, you can take people, and if they're going to work on it, that may mean lose weight. It may mean gain muscle. It may mean get coordination. But if you're going to really work at it, well, okay, let's say you work at it for 2 or 3 years. Well, you ought to be maybe not a great player, but you ought to be a pretty good player.
Much, much better.
You'd be a much, much better player if you work at it. Well, this is the same way. So what's important is that you always have to work from an intuitive space, not an intellectual space. It has to come, another way of saying that, it comes from the heart. Now, we do all kinds of things in intuitive space. Let's say things that everybody does now. A lot of people now touch type, right? It's called keyboarding now, not typing. So you put your hands out there and you do like this and you type. If you use your intellect and say, now, where's that T? Oh, yeah, this finger up there. Well, if you have to do it by thinking about it, you're going to be less than 10 words a minute. You're going to be like 4 or 5 words a minute. That's your max. Too slow. But if you get that into an intuitive space where you see the letter T and your finger just does that, just goes out and smacks that T on a thing because you're typing this thing that you're reading. So that's what I mean, get an intuitive space. Everything that people do really, really well, they do it from an intuitive space, whether it's playing soccer, whether it's typing, whether it's throwing a javelin, whether it's anything. You do it from the intuitive space, it's better. Even if it's making love. If you do it from the intuitive space, you're doing it better. If you have to think about it, you're clumsy, you're slow. It's not something you can have to think about. So this is the same way. So it's not an intellectual thing. So first thing you have to learn is to get out of your intellect and exist in your mind without your intellect. That's your mental intuitive space. And that's about the hardest thing that there is to learn. Just that. Well, how hard is it to learn to touch type? Well, you're not going to learn it in a day. You're going to learn it over months. And you're going to have to practice every day for months before you get to the point where your fingers know what they're doing on their own. Well, this is the same way. You can learn it in months if you practice. So intuitive space is one big one. Then you have to be focused. So if you want a specific thing to happen, like not to rain. You have to have all of your mental energy focused on that thing. Now, most people's mental energy is scattered all the time. And when people first learn to meditate, they find that out. The thoughts are just zinging through their head all the time. They can focus on something for about 3 seconds and then bling, in comes a thought. And then they try to focus on, get all those thoughts out of their head, and then come more thoughts. And that's how you practice focus is through meditation. Meditation will teach you to quiet your mind and empty it of everything. Just be there with nothing in your mind. That will give your mind some discipline. Without the discipline, your mind is like a room full of 3-year-olds. Everybody's just running every which way, and there's no discipline at all. Well, that's the way most people's thinking is. So, second thing is, one, you get intuitive space. Second, you need discipline. Your mind needs to be disciplined so it can focus with all your energy on one thing. Okay, the next thing then you need to do is you have to have some oomph in it, some caring, some connection. It has to be something that means something to you. It can't just be a thing you're doing, just for the hell of it. It needs to have, you really don't want any rain on that Saturday, because you and your whole extended family are all going to meet there, and it's really important, and you don't have any other place that you can meet. And it has to have something that really you want to happen. If you're healing, you have to really care about that person that you're healing. Uh-huh. They're not just, some subject I'm playing with, but you have to really care about them, you see? So it has to have, that's the kind of gets the power from that. So
that emotion, right?
It has to have some emotion, some connection, some genuineness that, of what you're doing. It can't be, you can't just be playing. If you're just playing with it, then nothing too much will happen. So you get all these things together, a mind that's disciplined, okay? The fact that you can think and function in intuitive space, not in intellectual space. That's the hardest one for people in our culture, because we function out of intellectual space, except when we train ourselves not to do it, which is what you do when you play soccer, or when you touch type, or when you do anything else that you're particularly good at. I had a guy in my house who was a painter. And man, he took that brush, he'd stick it in the paint, he'd tap it a couple of times, and he was painting woodwork in windows. There were glass with little pieces of wood in them. And that guy never used tape. He didn't put tape on.
Wow.
And he never got a molecule of paint on the glass, and he never let a molecule of wood go without paint on it. He was just good. But if you watched him, he went in the zone. He wasn't there anymore. He was in intuitive space. And what he did, he could put his hand up and draw a perfectly straight line. No wiggles, nothing, just perfectly straight line. But he couldn't do that if he was thinking about it. If you're thinking about it, well, make sure I don't want to miss that point. And if you're thinking about it, man, you're going to slop paint everywhere.
Right.
So it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you do it out of an intuitive space, you'll do it better. If it requires coordination, if it requires precision, you're going to do it better. Well, this requires precision. You have to think on a particular thing, and you have to get in that intuitive space. So that's, the guy who was the head painter there, he says, he just gets in a zone and goes, and he can paint more windows in an hour than anybody else can all day long, because he just, he just paints them like that. Yeah, no problem. So that's the key. You have to get in that intuitive space, not an intellectual space. You have to give up judging. You have to give up analyzing. You just have to do it. In other words, you have to be it. You have to be it. So if you can get in that space and you get oomph from caring, from really wanting to do this, it makes a difference to you. And if you can get rid of all the noise in your mind to where you can focus everything on just exactly what you're doing. And when you're playing soccer, when you're out there on that field, there are fans out in the stands. There are people on the sidelines. There's all this stuff going on. But when you're in the moment, all of that's gone. It just disappears. It's not totally there. It doesn't exist in your reality. You see, that's focus. That's what we're talking about. Nothing else is in your reality. So when you learn to meditate, that's what you're doing. You're putting your mind in that focus where there's nothing else going on in your reality except, let's say, healing, or except remote viewing, or except what you're doing in these things. So how long did it take you before you were good at that? Probably a decade. You probably played soccer when you were real little, and then when you were older, and then when you were older, and then when you're older. And all of that time put together makes you to where you are a good player, because you get into the zone. And when you're in the zone, you're just fluid. You move with the flow. You know what to do. Everything just works out right. And that makes you a really great player. And it's true of any sport, and actually not just sports, anything. Even if you're a painter, that's true. If you're one of those guys that drives those race cars at 200 mile an hour around corners, it's the same thing. Those guys get in a zone, and when they pull into the pit, they don't want anybody talking to them and chatting to them about what they're going to do afterwards or anything else. They have to keep their mind in the zone, because if they get out there and try to work from their intellect, they're going to die. They're going to crash. They have to stay in that. So whatever it is you're doing, if it's something that requires focus, you learn to get out of your intellect. Doing the paranormal things are the same way. And that's the hard thing for people to do that. It's easier maybe if you're actually playing soccer than it is if you're just sitting in a chair and have to get into that space. Get out of your intellect. It's a little harder thing to do, because it's not a doing thing, it's a being thing. But anybody can do it. Anybody can learn these things. It's not special few. Only special few probably work at it enough to get really good at it. But that's true of soccer players too, right? I mean, how many soccer players are really, really good, and how many are so-so, okay, and how many are, whatever. I mean, it's the same way, whether you playing the piano or playing soccer or anything else. There are a few that float up to be good enough to say, if they're sports, get in the Olympics, or go pro, but that's just the people who are best at it.